The galaxy operated by certain rules. Every civilization that had ever pushed its way into the stars had discovered those rules through hard experience. You could bend physics here and there, stretch it thin, probe for weaknesses in what seemed possible, but you could never actually shatter it. The universe had boundaries, unbending ones, thresholds that no level of technology, no depth of intelligence, no measure of desperation could ever cross. Every civilization understood this truth. Every civilization but one. The galactic consensus had kept its eyes on humanity for 3 centuries. Not from fear, not initially. In the beginning, it was little more than passing fascination, the kind of distant, faintly bored attention that elder species tend to give younger ones. Humans held interest the way a clever creature might, resourceful, obstinate, occasionally startling, but never threatening. Not yet, anyway. The consensus counted 47 member species among its ranks. The eldest, the Velera, had journeyed between star systems for more than 12,000 years. The newest arrivals, the Dothiki, had only cracked faster-than-light travel 8 centuries prior. Every species within the consensus had walked the same arduous path, the same grinding ascent from primitive beginnings to interstellar reach, shaped by identical fundamental laws of physics, the same immovable boundaries separating the possible from the impossible. Each of them had struck those boundaries. Each had learned to build a life within their confines. And then they had watched humanity slam directly into those very same walls, and somehow emerge intact on the other side. Admiral Cheney stood on the bridge of the unyielding resolve, her gaze fixed on the star map glowing before her. 53 years old, with cropped silver hair and dark eyes that carried the weight of more than most people witness across 3 lifetimes. She'd commanded 7 vessels before this one. She'd fought through 4 separate wars. She'd watched comrades perish in the frozen silence of the void, held the hands of crew members as they died, made calls that still jolted her awake at 3 in the morning, heart pounding against her ribs. Nothing in that history had readied her for this moment. "Run the diagnostics again," she ordered. Lieutenant Commander Yara Oae glanced up from her console. 31 years old, sharp-minded, and wearing the expression of someone who had cycled through the same diagnostics for 6 straight hours and was starting to reconsider every choice that had led her here. "Admiral, I've already run them 14 times. The numbers don't change." "Run them again." Yara complied. The numbers stayed exactly the same. Cheney studied the figures, willing them into something coherent. She held a doctorate in quantum mechanics. 2 decades of her life had gone into researching the theoretical ceilings of propulsion science. She'd absorbed every paper ever published on faster-than-light travel, the fringe theories alongside the rigorous academic work, the wild speculative pitches alongside the sober rejections. What the diagnostics were showing her wasn't difficult. It wasn't unprecedented. It wasn't even particularly ambitious. It was impossible. "Ma'am," said Commander David Park, her executive officer, moving to stand beside her. A reserved man, precise in his habits, the type who drafted lists and double-checked every item and rarely showed a flicker of nerves. Right now, he looked shaken. "The shipyard team's on comms. They're asking whether we've finished the initial assessment. Tell them we're still working through it. They've been holding for 2 hours. Then they can hold longer." David paused. "Admiral. They built this ship. They already know its capabilities." "I know what they think it can do," Cheney said. "I want to know what it's actually doing. There's a gap between those 2 things." She turned back toward the star map, because what it was actually doing shouldn't have been achievable at all. The vessel was named the Erebus. It carried no official designation beyond that. No fleet registry number, no formal classification, since humanity's existing system for cataloging warships had no slot for whatever the Erebus was. Creating one would mean either overhauling the entire classification framework or admitting, in official written record, that humanity had constructed something that defied physical law. Nobody within Admiralty Command wanted to do either just yet. The Erebus stretched 4.2 kilometers in length. That figure alone would have marked it as extraordinary. Humanity's largest existing warship, the Fortress of Dawn, measured a mere 2.8 kilometers. Building something larger was impressive engineering, sure, but it was comprehensible engineering, more raw material, bigger fabrication rigs, greater resources thrown at the challenge. Scale was simply a question of ambition and funding. But scale wasn't what made the Erebus defy explanation. What made it impossible was what lay inside it. Or rather, what existed inside it while simultaneously not existing there at all. Something that occupied a state the engineers who'd built it had come to describe, with mounting exasperation, as both present and absent, contingent entirely on what you attempted to strike it with. Something that inhabited ordinary physical space while also occupying a parallel realm of quantum probability. A realm that, according to every model humanity had ever built of the universe, should never have been reachable by any object larger than a subatomic particle. The Erebus was quantum-locked. It existed in a superposition of states. Real, yet not real. Present here, yet somehow elsewhere. Solid matter, yet also a wave of pure probability. And it held that state. Not for the fleeting instant that quantum superposition typically survives before the universe forces a resolution, but continuously, indefinitely, for as long as its power systems kept running. The engineers had christened it the quantum lock. They'd chased this breakthrough for 40 years. They'd finally achieved it 18 months back. And they still weren't entirely certain how. It's like, lead engineer Dr. Sophia Marsh had explained to Cheney during the briefing, pushing her glasses back up her nose and gesturing in the way people do when the vocabulary simply doesn't exist yet. Okay, you know how in quantum mechanics, particles can exist in superposition, multiple states simultaneously, until observation collapses the wave function and forces them into a single outcome. Yes, Cheney had said. The Erebus skips that last part. Cheney had just stared at her. The wave function never collapses. We engineered a system that blocks the collapse entirely. We call it the quantum anchor. It generates a field around the ship that, well, essentially it convinces the universe that no observation is occurring. So the ship sustains superposition even at a macroscopic scale. Sophia had paused. Theoretically this shouldn't be achievable. Decoherence at this scale ought to happen instantly and irreversibly. But we found a way to hold coherence anyway, and the ship proves it's possible after all. What does that mean in practical terms? Sophia's smile had carried the particular quality of someone about to detonate a fact that would rattle another person's entire worldview. It means that anything trying to strike the Erebus has roughly a 50% chance of passing straight through it. Because at the exact instant of impact, there's a 50% probability the ship simply isn't there, not in any physical sense, not at that location. Cheney had sat with that for a long beat. A 50% chance, she'd repeated. On average. We can skew those odds using the anchor systems. In full defensive mode, we can push it closer to 70-30. The ship only exists in normal space roughly 30% of the time. The rest of the time, it's, Sophia had gestured again, elsewhere, yet also here, just not in a way that solid matter can touch. And the weapons? They fire from within superposition too. The projectiles, the energy discharges. They remain in superposition right up until contact with a target. At that instant, we force their wave function to collapse. We drag them into definite physical reality precisely at the point of impact. So they strike with complete physical force. Another pause. There's no known countermeasure. A weapon that doesn't physically exist until the moment it's already inside your hull is a weapon no shield can stop. Cheney had spent a long stretch afterward simply staring at the star map. Now she stood on the bridge of that same impossible vessel, watching the diagnostics confirm, for the 15th time, that the Erebus performed exactly as Sophia had described. The consensus is going to lose their collective minds, David said quietly beside her. That's the best case scenario, Cheney said. The worst case is they try to destroy it before we get the chance to use it. David glanced her way. You think they've picked up on it? They pick up on everything. Cheney turned from the display. The real question is whether they understand what they're seeing. And right now, my guess is no. Because if they understood it, we'd already have a message waiting for us, asking, very politely, in heavily diplomatic phrasing, exactly how, in defiance of every known law of physics, we managed to build this thing. As if summoned, Lieutenant Torres at Communications looked up. Admiral. Incoming transmission from the Consensus Central Council. Cheney and David traded a glance. They're asking, Torres went on, reading straight off his screen with the look of someone fighting back a grin, and I'm quoting directly, whether we can explain the anomalous sensor readings being generated by the vessel currently registered as the Erebus, which appear inconsistent with any known physical process and are causing, quote, significant concern among the Consensus Science Council. 3 of whose members have apparently requested emergency counseling. Silence settled over the bridge for a moment. Then, despite everything, Cheney laughed, short, dry, worn out, but genuine. She turned back to the star map, taking in the scattered lights before her, the thousands of inhabited systems, the dozens of consensus worlds, the territories humanity had spent 3 centuries clawing for a foothold in. She thought about what it meant that 3 alien scientists now needed therapy because of her ship's sensor data. Send a reply, she said. Tell them we'd be glad to discuss the Erebus at the upcoming Consensus Assembly. Tell them we're looking forward to it. She paused. And tell them the counseling is probably wise. They're going to need it. The Consensus Central Council convened aboard the station known as Harmony. Harmony wasn't a warship. It wasn't any kind of military outpost. It had been constructed 12,200 years earlier as a deliberate gesture of peace, neutral territory where species who might otherwise be exchanging weapons fire could instead sit together and rely on conversation. It was massive, stretching 300 kilometers across. And it possessed the kind of beauty that emerges by accident when something gets built by committee, over a millennium, by dozens of different species. Chaotic, strange, riddled with architectural decisions that made no sense from any single cultural lens, yet somehow adding up to something that felt like the physical embodiment of the notion that different things could exist side by side. Ambassador Rachel Torres had called Harmony home for 11 years. 60 years old, brown-skinned, with streaks of gray threading through her hair, she carried a reputation as the most patient figure in the entire human diplomatic corps. She'd brokered 7 trade agreements, settled 3 border disputes, ended a year-long conflict, and wrapped up 1 genuine small war in just 4 months. She'd shared negotiating tables with species that breathed ammonia, species that spoke in ultrasound, species with no notion of individual identity who found humanity's obsession with personal names bewildering, and species that had attempted to eat her on 2 separate occasions, both handled with impressive composure. She wasn't feeling particularly composed at the moment. She sat in the antechamber outside the council hall, working through the briefing materials Admiral Cheney had sent over, feeling that specific chill that settles in once you understand, with total clarity, that things are about to get far messier than anyone had braced for. Her aide, a young man named Marcus Webb, appeared in the doorway. Ambassador, the council's ready for you. Give me the breakdown. Full council. All 47 member species. Marcus hesitated. And the Science Council sent 3 observers. All 3 are, the briefing calls it, visibly distressed. Rachel set the document down. How visibly? One of them, the Velora rep, is apparently sitting in a corner making a sound their cultural attaché described as the harmonic of deep cosmological anxiety. Rachel exhaled slowly. Right. She rose, straightened her jacket, and gathered her briefing case. Let's go break a few more things. The council chamber was an immense circular space, 47 seats arranged in a flawless ring around a central floor where the speaker stood. Every seat had been tailored to its occupant, different atmospheres sealed behind transparent barriers, varying gravity, distinct light spectra. To Rachel's human nose, the room carried a blend of ozone, something floral, a note that unpleasantly recalled overripe fruit, and the sharp chemical edge of Dothraki air filtration. She walked to the center and stood there, feeling the combined attention of 47 species settle on her. Grand Counselor Sean, the Velora representative currently holding the rotating chairmanship, leaned forward from the ring's highest tier. The Velora were tall, slender, pale blue beings with large dark eyes and 4 limbs that moved with unhurried, deliberate grace. Sean was roughly 400 years old and carried the particular stillness of someone who had watched civilizations rise and crumble and had learned to take the long view of things. Right now, that long view seemed unsettled. Ambassador Torres, Sean said, in the precise formal consensus standard used across all council sessions, thank you for appearing before us on such short notice. We'll dispense with the customary preamble. You've received the documents we transmitted. You understand the nature of our concern. I do, Rachel said. Then you understand that what your species appears to have built poses a challenge not simply to the current political balance of the consensus, but to the foundational physical laws underpinning all of our scientific understanding. I understand that's how it looks from the outside. A low murmur rippled around the ring. Shan's forearm shifted slightly, a gesture Rachel had come to recognize, over 11 years, as landing somewhere between displeasure and resignation. Ambassador, our instruments have spent 36 hours analyzing sensor data from the Erebus. We've consulted scientists from 23 member species. The consensus, forgive the wordplay, is that what your vessel is doing shouldn't be possible. And yet it's doing it. We'd like an explanation. Rachel had been bracing for this exact moment. Ever since reading Cheney's briefing, she'd turned over every possible way to frame what humanity had done without triggering outright panic. In the end, she'd concluded there was no framing that would avoid it. The truth was going to cause alarm no matter how it was delivered. The best she could manage was to deliver it calmly and try to contain the aftermath. The Erebus, she said, is a quantum-locked warship. It sustains macroscopic quantum superposition through technology we call the quantum anchor. In practical terms, the ship exists simultaneously in ordinary physical space and in quantum probability space. It can't be reliably detected. It can't be reliably targeted. Its weapons deliver force from within superposition, bypassing conventional shielding entirely. We believe it represents a substantial leap beyond any military technology currently deployed. The silence that followed had weight to it, thick, dense, packed with things not yet spoken aloud. Then the Dothraki representative, a broad, gray-skinned being named Hask, spoke up. The Dothraki were known for bluntness. You built a ship that breaks physics, Hask said. Not a question. We built a ship that operates within a regime of physics previously believed inaccessible at macroscopic scale, Rachel replied. We didn't break physics. We found a door nobody knew existed. A door? Asterisk asterisk a door. Velen echoed. The subtle harmonic shift beneath their voice made it clear that the wording had not landed well. Ambassador, with respect, what you're describing isn't a door. You're describing a weapon capable of destroying any vessel in any fleet operated by every member of this consensus, a weapon against which no existing defensive system provides any meaningful protection. And you're calling it a door. I'm describing the technology, Rachel replied. How that technology is used is an entirely separate discussion. Is it? The question came from one of the smaller figures seated in the circle, the representative of the Keth. A species renowned for mathematical precision and a habit of skipping social pleasantries in favor of pure logic. The Keth delegate, Zoe, radiated the sort of tightly restrained agitation that, for a Keth, was the equivalent of shouting. Ambassador Torres, let us be exact. Your species has, without notifying the consensus and without submitting to the technological review required under the Harmonic Accord of 2847, developed a weapons system so far beyond current standards that our entire defense architecture is incapable of countering it. You have presented us with a fait accompli. You ask us to discuss its application, yet its application is now entirely within your control. You have built something that could destroy us, and you're smiling while calling it a door. Rachel kept her expression neutral, though it took effort. The Harmonic Accord of 2847 requires review of weapons technology intended for deployment within consensus space. The Erebus was developed in human territory at a classified facility and has not yet been deployed anywhere. A technicality, Zoe replied. A legal distinction, Rachel corrected, one that humanity maintains is valid. But I understand your point regarding the spirit of the Accord. And I want to assure the Council that humanity's intentions concerning the Erebus are, humanity's intentions, interrupted the representative of the Graph. The massive armored species communicated through deep subsonic rumbles that their ambassador's comm unit translated into speech. Ambassador, we have observed your species for 3 centuries. For 3 centuries, we've watched humanity take what appeared to be modest technological advances and repeatedly achieve results that far exceeded our expectations. We should have adjusted those expectations. We did not. We assumed your species would follow the same developmental path as every civilization before you. We believed the hard limits of physics would slow you just as they slowed us. We were mistaken. And now we are sitting here, confronted with what that mistake has produced, trying to decide what should happen next. The chamber had fallen completely silent. Rachel stood in its center and allowed the silence to linger. For decades of diplomacy had taught her that sometimes the strongest move was to let people finish being afraid before saying another word. Then, in an even voice, she said, "The Erebus was built because humanity needs it." That immediately captured everyone's attention. Over the last 15 years, she continued, for human colony ships have disappeared in the outer reach. 3 human mining stations have been destroyed. The official reports blamed mechanical failures, yet the black box recordings recovered from 2 of them detected weapons fire before the transmissions ended. Last year, a human diplomatic vessel carrying 9 crew members and 2 ambassadors never reached its destination. We located the debris field 6 months later. The weapon signatures found on the wreckage matched no known human weapons system. She allowed the words to settle. We have been patient. We brought every one of these incidents before this council. We requested investigations. In return, we've received what I can only generously describe as inadequate responses. So yes, we built the Erebus. We built it because someone in this galaxy is killing our people, and no one in this room appears especially interested in stopping them. We built it to make one thing unmistakably clear. If those attacks continue, whoever is responsible will discover that humanity is no longer an easy target. Another silence followed. This one felt different. Velen's forearms moved through an intricate sequence that Rachel recognized as the Velair equivalent of a weary sigh. Ambassador, the Council is aware of the incidents you have mentioned. The investigations remain ongoing. For 15 years, Rachel answered. They've been ongoing for 15 years. These matters require time. 9 crew members, Rachel replied. 2 ambassadors. Debris drifting through an empty sector of space. That isn't a technical investigation requiring 15 years. It's a political problem that 15 years has failed to resolve. She swept her gaze around the circle. 47 species. Every one of them more powerful than humanity had been only a century earlier. Every one of them watching her with expressions ranging from discomfort to fear. And a few displaying something she couldn't quite identify. Humanity isn't here to threaten anyone. We're here because we belong here. We've earned our place in this galaxy the same way every species represented in this chamber earned theirs, through effort, sacrifice, and loss. The Erebus was not built to start a war. It exists to make absolutely clear what the price of starting one with us would be. She picked up her briefing case. We will gladly discuss the technology further whenever the Council wishes. We will be transparent about both its capabilities and its limitations. We will engage with any legitimate legal concerns regarding the Harmonic Accord. What we will not do is apologize for defending ourselves. She paused at the edge of the speaker's platform. And I suggest the Council spends the time before our next meeting thinking very carefully about those 15-year-old investigations. Because the Erebus is only one ship. The shipyard that built it is still operating. Then she walked out. Behind her, the Council chamber erupted into 47 different species producing 47 different sounds, all expressing different versions of exactly the same reaction. In the antechamber, Marcus was waiting for her, eyes wide. How did it go? About the way I expected, Rachel replied. Get me a secure channel to Admiral Cheney, and make me some coffee. Very strong coffee. Marcus frowned. Should I be worried? Rachel thought about the look on Velen's face after she'd said the shipyard was still running. She remembered the Keth representative's tightly controlled agitation. She recalled the deep grath rumble that her translator had turned into words, even though what she'd actually felt in her chest had been something closer to a threat assessment. Yes, she answered. But not yet. The message arrived at 0300 station time. Rachel had been asleep. Or at least trying to be, when her secure communicator sounded the distinctive three-tone sequence reserved for Priority 1 alerts. She was out of bed and sitting at her desk in less than 30 seconds, a reflex honed over 40 years of waking at impossible hours to deal with unwelcome news. The transmission came from an encrypted source. The encryption wasn't just good, it was exceptional. Sophisticated enough that her system needed 40 seconds to break it, which was 40 seconds longer than it normally required. When the contents finally appeared, there was only a single set of coordinates and one sentence. If you want to know who is killing your people, come alone. Rachel stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she called Marcus. Get me a shuttle, she said as soon as he answered, his voice thick with sleep. Ambassador, it's 3 in the morning. I know. Get me a shuttle. Where are you going? She read him the coordinates. A long silence followed. That's in the drift, he said at last. The unmapped sector. Ambassador, I know exactly what it is. Just get me a shuttle. She paused. And Marcus, don't tell anyone where I'm going. Not yet. She could almost hear him debating whether to argue. He'd worked beside her long enough to recognize when she'd already made up her mind. I'll have it ready in 20 minutes, he finally said. But I'm logging those coordinates with a 48-hour delayed release. If you haven't returned by then, the entire council gets them. Rachel nodded. That's fine. It's the right call. She dressed without turning on the lights, slipped a compact sidearm into her jacket, a habit she'd kept ever since an Asher separatist cell had decided to use her assassination as a political statement, and headed for the shuttle bay. The drift was the name navigators gave to the vast, unmapped region lying between the consensus frontier and the unclaimed reaches of space beyond. It wasn't empty. Space never truly was. But it was thinly traveled, poorly charted, and favored by anyone who preferred not to be found. Pirates operated there. Smugglers. Independent prospectors. And, apparently, whoever had sent Rachel a message in the middle of the night. The coordinates brought her to a sprawling asteroid field. Once, it had been a gas giant. Something, most likely a catastrophic collision billions of years earlier, had shattered it into countless fragments. The debris ranged from pebbles no larger than a fist to rocky bodies the size of small moons, packed densely enough that navigating through them demanded real precision. It was exactly the sort of place someone would choose if they wanted privacy. Her sensors detected the other vessel while she was still 3 minutes away. It was small. Smaller than her own shuttle, in fact. No identification beacon. No transponder. Nothing. When she opened a communications channel, several long seconds passed before anyone answered. Ambassador Torres. The voice was artificial, filtered through multiple layers of scrambling designed to conceal its source. Thank you for coming. I wasn't certain you would. I almost didn't, Rachel replied. Who are you? Someone who has been trying to get this information to you for a very long time. A brief pause. Someone who has been prevented. Another pause. I won't tell you which species I belong to. What I will tell you is this: what I'm about to share will place both of us in danger. Before we continue, I need your word that you'll protect my identity. I can't promise that without knowing what you're offering. Then let me offer you the first piece. Another pause. Consider it a test. A data file transferred into her shuttle's systems. The colony ship Helena disappeared 4 years ago. 112 colonists aboard. You were told investigators found no evidence of hostile action. That's what the official report said. The report was falsified. Silence settled between them once again. Open the file. Rachel did. It contained sensor logs. Raw, unprocessed data from a consensus monitoring buoy. The kind scattered throughout the drift, quietly recording everything that entered its range before transmitting the information to the central network. These logs had never appeared in the official investigation. They showed, with unmistakable clarity, the Helena encountering another vessel. Rachel's system identified its configuration, and a cold knot tightened in her stomach. Tharkin. The Tharkin were not members of the consensus. Their territory bordered the drift, and they were known as a powerful, isolationist civilization that maintained official neutrality in all consensus affairs. They had lingered on the edges of galactic politics for as long as anyone could remember. They traded from time to time. They communicated only when necessary. Among diplomats, they were regarded as one of those rare species that simply wished to be left alone, and had largely been granted that wish. The sensor records showed a Tharkin vessel closing on the Helena. They showed weapons fire. Then they showed the Helena disappearing from every sensor. The Tharkin, Rachel said. It wasn't a question. Not officially, the distorted voice replied. Not under orders from the Tharkin government, or at least not in any way that can be proven. What I believe you're dealing with is a faction. A breakaway element within the Tharkin military command that has concluded humanity's expansion into the outer reach threatens Tharkin interests. For the past 15 years, they've been quietly eliminating that threat, targeting isolated ships far from witnesses, in regions where the evidence is easy to erase. And the consensus knows? Silence answered first. Some within the consensus know. Some have deliberately avoided looking too closely because the Tharkin are useful. They occupy a buffer zone between consensus space and the outer reach, serving strategic interests that many governments value. Others have chosen not to investigate because doing so would demand action, and action requires consensus. Achieving consensus among 47 species over a conflict involving a powerful non-member state is. The voice trailed away. Complicated, Rachel finished. Deeply complicated. Yes. Rachel stared at the sensor logs. 112 colonists. Families. Children. Gone. Yet the official report had declared there was no evidence of hostile action. Someone had reviewed those records, written those words, filed that report, and gone home at the end of the day. Something cold and immovable settled deep inside her. How many incidents, she asked. Confirmed. 7. And the number you suspect? Closer to 12. And you're telling me this now because? Because the Erebus changed everything. The voice paused. When your ship appeared and the Science Council began its crisis, conversations started taking place in rooms where they never should have happened. I intercepted communications between the Tharkin faction and representatives of at least 2 consensus member states. They are discussing a preemptive strike against the Erebus before it can be deployed. They refer to it as removing the threat before humanity fully understands what it has created. Rachel's hands became perfectly still on the shuttle controls. They want to destroy the Erebus. Yes. The voice remained calm. They want to destroy the Erebus, its crew, the shipyard that built it, and, I believe, the admiral commanding it. They intend to move quickly, before the political consequences can catch up with them. And I believe they already have the necessary assets in position. You said 2 consensus member states. Rachel's voice sharpened. Which ones? I can't tell you that. Why not? Because I don't yet possess enough evidence for the accusations to survive the Council's legal process. What I have is enough to warn Admiral Cheney. Enough to make her ready. Enough for, the voice stopped abruptly. Rachel's sensors flared. Multiple contacts. Incoming. Fast. Not her shuttle. Not the small vessel she'd been speaking to. Something much larger. Several somethings. They found you, the voice said. For the first time, even through the layers of electronic scrambling, Rachel heard unmistakable fear. Go, Ambassador. Leave. Now. Do not return to this location. I'll contact you again when, the transmission cut off. Rachel's display immediately registered 3 incoming ships. Large ones. She looked at the configuration data, and her breath caught for the briefest instant. Not Tharkin. Consensus registered. But the weapon signatures charging aboard those 3 vessels were anything but standard consensus armaments. They were military grade. Warship grade. And they were targeting the small vessel she had been communicating with. Rachel made her decision in less than a second. She pushed her shuttle engines to maximum output and altered course, not away from the 3 incoming ships, but directly toward them. At the same time, she opened every available communication channel. This is Ambassador Rachel Torres of the United Earth Government, she announced. You are currently operating in the presence of a diplomatic vessel. Under Article 7 of the Harmonic Accord, I am placing this entire area under diplomatic hold. Any weapons discharged within this zone will be considered an act of war against Earth. Stand down immediately and identify yourselves. For a moment, there was hesitation. That was the moment she had been counting on. Nobody shot a diplomat. Even those carrying out illegal operations, even those willing to do terrible things in secret, understood that killing a diplomat was the one action guaranteed to expose everything in the most damaging way possible. The 3 vessels did not fire. They also did not respond. Rachel watched her sensors as they withdrew. Quickly. Precisely. Like they had rehearsed the maneuver. Within less than a minute, they had vanished back into the drift, their identification systems still completely dark. The small ship remained. Are you all right? Rachel asked over the channel. Static. Then, yes. The voice sounded different. The synthetic flatness created by the scrambler had fractured slightly, revealing something beneath it. Fear. That was unexpected. I've been doing this a long time, Rachel replied. She turned her shuttle away. Leave this area. Use a different route. And when you contact me again, and I hope you do soon, bring me those names. She set course for Harmony. Her hands remained perfectly steady on the controls. She had learned long ago that there was a time for fear. But it was not during the crisis. The shaking could come afterward. Admiral Cheney received Rachel's message in the early morning hours. The Erebus sat quietly in its shipyard berth, and Chini remained alone in her cabin for a long time after reading the transmission before finally calling her command staff together. They assembled in the small briefing room adjacent to the main bridge. 7 people. The core command team of the most unconventional warship humanity had ever built. Chini studied their faces and considered what she was about to ask of them. "Someone wants this ship destroyed," she said without introduction. "And they have assets positioned to attempt it." The room went silent. "I want operational security raised to level 4 immediately. Effective now. I want our departure from the shipyard moved forward." She looked toward Lieutenant Commander Yara Oae. "How much can we accelerate the timeline?" Yara pulled up the information on her tablet. "The quantum drive systems are 92% operational. We had planned another 3 weeks of integration testing before deployment. Can we leave at 92%? Yara's expression immediately revealed that she disliked the question. "Technically, yes. But we lose some response capability in the probability modulation system. The ship's ability to adjust superposition bias in real time would be slower than optimal. Approximately 30% slower. What does that mean operationally? Instead of shifting from 30% present state probability to 70% in 2 seconds, it would take closer to 6. She hesitated. "In most situations, that difference is manageable. In an extremely fast engagement." She let the sentence finish itself. "Potentially critical. What else? The quantum torpedo targeting systems haven't completed calibration. We'd be operating at roughly 80% accuracy instead of 97. Meaning? We miss more often." Chini nodded. "Everything else? Fully operational. Conventional weapons, shields, propulsion, life support, communications, all at 100%. The quantum systems are the only components still being finalized." "All right." Chini looked around the table. "Here's what I know. And here's what I suspect." Everyone focused on her. "I know a faction within the Tharkan military structure has been responsible for the deaths of hundreds of our people over the past 15 years. She paused. "I suspect that faction has allies within the consensus who helped conceal those actions." Another pause. "I know they are now aware that we either know the truth or are about to discover it. And I know they believe the Erebus changes the strategic balance in a way they cannot accept." Her voice hardened slightly. "I also know they have ships in this area with both the capability and, apparently, the intention to attack us." She allowed the silence to absorb that. "What I don't know is when they will act. I don't know exactly how many ships they have. And I don't know whether their allies inside the consensus will provide additional support." Her eyes moved to her weapons officer. Lieutenant Commander James Cole. The tall, lean officer looked up. He carried a quiet intensity that Chini had always found reassuring. "If we're attacked while we're still in the shipyard berth, what's our situation?" James didn't need time to think. He had clearly already considered the possibility. "Bad," he said. He didn't soften the answer. "The quantum lock isn't useful while we're in the berth," James explained. "We're physically connected to the shipyard infrastructure. We have to disconnect before we can activate the quantum anchor, and that takes a minimum of 4 minutes." He looked around the table. "If they hit us during those first 4 minutes, we're fighting as a conventional ship. A very large conventional ship with extremely advanced conventional weapons, but still conventional. And once we're disconnected," James continued, "then we're the Erebus." Something changed in his expression. Not exactly pride. Something close to it. "And I'd take this ship against anything they can put in front of us." "I need better than anything," Chini said. "I need to know what they actually have. We don't have confirmed intelligence on Tharkan military assets operating in this region," Major Priya Singh, her intelligence officer, replied. "What I can tell you is what we know about Tharkan warship capabilities in general. She brought up a display. Their standard fleet structure revolves around what they call void cutters. Fast, highly maneuverable, medium-sized vessels. Strong offensive capability. Lighter armor compared to our equivalents. She paused. Their primary advantage is speed. They can reposition faster than anything currently fielded by the consensus fleet. Faster than the Erebus under conventional propulsion? Yes. Priya hesitated. But the Erebus does not fight conventionally. No, Chini agreed. It doesn't. She looked around the table once more. Here's what we're going to do. Everyone waited. We accelerate our departure timeline to 48 hours. Every system that can be finalized in that time gets finalized. Everything that cannot be completed receives the highest operational state possible. She leaned forward. We leave the shipyard in 2 days. We find open space where the quantum anchor can actually be used. A pause. We are not going to sit in this berth and wait for someone to decide whether they want to try killing us. And then? David Park asked. Chini looked at him. Then we find out who those ships belonged to when they came after Ambassador Torres. Her voice lowered. And we find out what happened to our people. She let 15 years of unanswered questions settle over the room. And we make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. The next 48 hours became organized chaos. The engineering teams who had been promised 3 more weeks were suddenly told they had 2 days. There was a significant amount of profanity. There was frustration. There was genuine disbelief. And then, because this was a human crew working on a project they had collectively sacrificed years of their lives to complete, something remarkable happened. They adapted. They pushed forward. People worked 20-hour shifts. Dr. Sophia Marsh was recorded at her station for 31 consecutive hours, slept for 4, and returned looking exactly as exhausted as someone who had only slept for 4 hours should look. The quantum drive integration climbed from 92% to 96%. The torpedo targeting calibration reached 89%. 3 separate support systems originally scheduled for completion in 2 weeks were finished in 30 hours. Chini walked the ship throughout those 48 hours. She wasn't there to give orders. The department heads already had their orders. She walked because after 20 years commanding ships, she had learned there were things a commander could accomplish simply by being present that no order ever could. When the crew saw their admiral moving through the corridors at 2 in the morning, checking on progress and speaking with teams, it communicated something no speech or official message ever could. I am here. This matters. You matter. She stopped at every station. She remembered names. She asked about the work. Not as a performance, but because she genuinely wanted to understand every part of the ship her crew was bringing to life. During the 3rd stop of her first circuit, she found Ensign Danny Reeves sitting inside a maintenance crawlway, a quantum relay component held carefully in his hands. He was staring at it with the expression of someone who had been fighting the same problem for far too long. Ensign Reeves. He jumped so suddenly he nearly dropped the component. Admiral. I'm sorry. What's the problem? He glanced down at the relay, then back at her. He looked young. Probably 22. A face that still carried traces of youth despite the exhaustion surrounding his eyes. The relay coupling won't seat correctly. I've tried 6 different configurations. The specifications say it should work, but they didn't account for thermal expansion. He turned the component slightly. When the coupling heats up, it shifts alignment by approximately 3 mm. And what happens at 3 mm of misalignment? It creates signal degradation in the quantum coherence monitoring system. About 4%. He swallowed. Under normal conditions, that's not significant. But if the ship enters active quantum engagement, a 4% monitoring loss could delay the anchor system's response by up to 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Reeves nodded. In Lieutenant Commander Cole's combat analysis, 2 seconds could be the difference between the Erebus successfully phasing out of a weapon's impact. He looked back at the component. Or taking the full force of the hit. "What have you tried?" she asked. Then she sat down on the floor of the corridor. Because this conversation was worth having properly. Danny stared at her for a moment. Then he carefully placed the component between them and began explaining. It took 40 minutes. By the end of that time, they had a solution. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't the kind of answer that would appear in a textbook or become a revolutionary design principle. But it worked. Danny had been approaching the problem from one direction. Cheney's own background in quantum drive theory, a field she hadn't actively worked in for 15 years, but one she had never completely forgotten, approached it from another. The answer existed somewhere between the two. "That'll work," Danny said, holding up the reassembled coupling and inspecting it. There was a quiet spark in his expression. The unmistakable look of someone who had just defeated a problem that had been fighting back. "Ma'am, that'll actually work." "Good." Cheney stood, brushing dust from her uniform. "Install it. Document the solution and send it to Dr. Marsh. If this problem exists here, there's a chance we have the same issue in other relays." She started walking away. "Admiral." Danny's voice stopped her. She turned. He looked uncertain for a moment, like he was debating whether he should say what he was thinking. Then he did. "The crew, everyone here, we understand what's at stake." He looked down briefly. "We know someone wants to make sure this ship never gets used." A pause. "We just..." He stopped. Then tried again. "We just want you to know we're ready." Cheney studied him. 22 years old. Sitting in a maintenance crawlway in the middle of the night. Working on a ship that the laws of physics had insisted should never exist. "I know," she said. She held his gaze. "And from this moment forward, that's exactly what I'm counting on." The Erebus departed the shipyard 4 hours ahead of even the accelerated schedule. Its systems reached 98% readiness, better than anyone had predicted. And it moved into open space with the quiet confidence of something that did not entirely belong to normal reality. And knew it. Cheney stood on the bridge and watched the shipyard disappear behind them. She thought about Danny Reeves and his relay coupling. She thought about Sophia Marsh and her 31-hour shift. She thought about the 700 people who had accomplished the impossible because they understood exactly why the impossible needed to exist. "Quantum anchor," she said. The bridge grew quiet. "Activate." The lights shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. The edges of everything seemed to blur slightly, as though reality itself had softened for a brief moment. The air felt heavier. Thicker. Then everything settled. The diagnostics displayed green across every system. The Erebus slipped sideways into its superposition state, existing simultaneously in normal space and quantum probability space. Half real. Half possibility. And then it began its journey into the unknown. Behind them, sensors detected 3 fast-moving vessels leaving the drift region. They were on an intercept course. "We have company," James Cole announced from the weapons station. His voice remained calm. Precise. "Ready. 3 vessels. Dark configuration. Void cutter class." A pause. They were waiting. Time to intercept. At their current velocity, 6 hours. If they increase drive output, 4 hours 30 minutes. Cheney leaned back in her command chair. "Let them come." She looked at the main display. 3 small markers moved steadily toward the massive, shimmering signature of the Erebus. "We're not running." Her eyes remained fixed on the approaching vessels. "And let's find out what happens when someone tries to destroy a ship that isn't entirely there." They arrived at 0614 hours. 3 Tharkin void cutters. They approached in a formation Cheney recognized immediately. A classic envelopment pattern. Designed to trap a target between 3 separate firing vectors. It was an excellent tactic against a conventional vessel. Almost impossible to counter. A ship couldn't defend against 3 simultaneous attack angles. No matter which direction it turned, one side would always be exposed to at least one attacker. Cheney watched the formation develop on the tactical display. And she felt something she hadn't expected. Calm. Not the artificial calm of someone forcing down fear. Not the empty calm of someone in shock. The genuine, steady calm of a commander who had studied the battlefield, understood every element of it, and already knew exactly what came next. James. Her voice was quiet. Target all 3 simultaneously. James Cole's hands were already moving. Targeting solutions locked. A brief pause. Quantum torpedoes ready. 6 tubes loaded, James reported. Standard shields raised. He glanced toward the probability display. Although with the quantum anchor active. A brief pause. We're currently sitting at 62% presence in normal space. Their weapons have a 38% chance of passing through us without causing harm. Don't get comfortable with that, Cheney said. James looked back at her. 38% doesn't mean much to the crew member who gets hit by the 62% shot. Understood. The Tharkin vessels opened fire at maximum range. That was unusual. Most tactical doctrine favored closing distance before engaging, improving accuracy and reducing the time available for a target to react. Opening fire from maximum range was either an act of desperation, or an attempt to overwhelm an enemy through sheer volume. Cheney watched the incoming weapon streams appear across the tactical display and chose a third possibility. They were testing. They were firing from maximum distance because they wanted data. They wanted to understand what happened when their weapons reached the Erebus before committing to a closer engagement. Smart, she said quietly. The incoming fire spread across the Erebus' projected position. Several impacts connected. The conventional shields absorbed the strikes, dispersing the energy across the defensive grid. Several others simply vanished from sensor tracking, their energy apparently disappearing at the exact moment they encountered the ship's quantum field. And 3 rounds passed directly through the space the Erebus occupied. They continued onward without ever interacting with the vessel. Confirmed probability bypass, Yara announced from her station, barely containing her excitement. 3 rounds passed through without effect. Local quantum state rejected physical interaction. Damage? Minor shield strain on 2 sections. Nothing significant. On the tactical display, the 3 Tharkin vessels paused. Cheney could almost picture what was happening aboard their bridges. The confusion. The instruments reporting impossible results. Weapons that had clearly struck their target somehow hitting nothing. Tactical officers trying to reconcile reality with what their systems insisted could not happen. They're adjusting formation, James said. Closing to half range. Cheney watched the display. Now we return fire. A pause. 1 torpedo each. She looked toward the weapons station. Quantum collapse on impact. Firing. 3 torpedoes left the Erebus. Or rather, 3 quantum probability events departed the vessel. They moved across the distance between ships as pure superposition states. On the tactical display, they appeared only as faint distortions. Not the bright, solid trails of conventional weapons. Because conventional tracking systems followed physical objects. And these were not physical. Not yet. Each torpedo reached its designated target. Then, at the exact moment of arrival, the targeting system forced the collapse. Reality asserted itself. The torpedoes became physical. Inside the shields of the 3 Tharkan ships. Not outside. Not striking the outer hull where defensive systems could absorb or redirect the force. Inside. A quantum torpedo in a superposition state did not need to overcome physical shields. It passed through them while non-physical. Then it became real exactly where the targeting system intended. The results were immediate. And devastating. All 3 Tharkan ships suffered direct internal impacts. The lead vessel went dark almost instantly. Every power signature vanished. The ship continued drifting forward only on its existing momentum. The lead ship is neutralized, James reported. His voice remained calm. Precise. Ships 2 and 3 have sustained significant internal damage. Both remain operational. The remaining 2 Tharkan vessels did something Cheney had not expected. They did not continue the attack. They did not retreat. Instead, they abandoned the envelopment formation and moved toward each other. Closer. Closer. Until they were almost flying side by side. What are they doing? David Park asked. Priya Singh answered first. They're trying to create a target too large for quantum torpedoes to resolve. Everyone looked toward her. If their ships are close enough, their probability fields may overlap. Our targeting systems might not be able to collapse a torpedo's wave function onto one vessel without affecting the other. Can they actually do that? Cheney asked. James was already calculating. Unknown. His eyes moved across the data. The guidance system should still be able to distinguish between separate targets, but at this range and separation distance. He paused. There is a possibility of what engineers call quantum bleed. The collapse event could partially propagate between both ships, spreading the energy instead of delivering a full impact to one target. They figured out the limitation of our weapons, David said quietly. They're skilled tacticians, Cheney replied. She looked toward James. What do you recommend? For 2 seconds, he said nothing. Not hesitation. Calculation. The silence of someone genuinely working through the problem. Conventional weapons at this range. He brought up the rail gun systems. Our rail systems can strike both ships sequentially before they have time to reposition. Their shields can withstand the impacts, but they'll have to redirect power to maintain them. A pause. And while that power is diverted. His expression hardened slightly. I hit them with a quantum torpedo through the opening. Cheney didn't hesitate. Do it. The Erebus opened fire with its conventional weapons systems. 12 railgun turrets fired simultaneously, unleashing a sustained storm of physical rounds against the 2 remaining Tharkan vessels. The impacts came in rapid succession. The enemy shields flared. The Tharkan ships immediately began the automated process of redirecting additional power toward defensive systems. And in the brief window when their offensive capabilities were reduced, a single quantum torpedo crossed the distance between the vessels. It collapsed precisely inside the engine compartment of the second Tharkan ship. The vessel stopped moving. The third ship, the only one still fully operational, remained in position for 4 seconds. Cheney watched it carefully. She could almost read the hesitation in that brief pause. She could imagine the tactical officer aboard the remaining vessel running the same calculations she had already made and reaching the same conclusion. 3 ships. 1 completely neutralized. 2 disabled. No significant damage to the Erebus beyond minor shield strain. Then the final Tharkan vessel turned. And ran. Should I pursue? James asked. No, Cheney replied immediately. Let it go. David looked toward her. They'll report back. Whoever sent them will know the attack failed. I know. Cheney kept watching the retreating vessel as it disappeared farther into the distance. I want them to report back. She paused. I want whoever authorized this to understand exactly what happened here. I want them to understand what it means." Her eyes remained on the display. "The third ship escaping is more valuable to us than the third ship destroyed." She turned away from the screen. A destroyed ship tells them only one thing: it didn't survive. She looked around the bridge. A ship that retreats tells them everything. A moment passed. That we don't need to destroy everything we fight. Her voice remained calm. That we are deliberate. That we are controlled. That we are not looking for a war. She paused. And that the next time they send ships after us. A faint edge entered her voice. They should send more. The combat assessment compiled by Yara within the hour made for remarkable reading. Total engagement duration *11 minutes, 40 seconds. Incoming fire received *87 rounds, multiple weapon types. Damage sustained *minor shield strain across 2 sections. Hull breaches *0. Casualties *0. Enemy vessels neutralized or disabled *3 out of 3. Weapons deployed by the Erebus *42 conventional rounds. 3 quantum torpedoes. Cheney read the report twice. Not because she questioned the numbers. Because she wanted them to fully settle in her mind. 87 incoming weapons. 0 casualties. Not because of luck. Because the ship had performed exactly as Dr. Sophia Marsh had predicted. When weapons struck, roughly 1/3 of the time the Erebus simply wasn't physically there to be damaged. She thought about the engineers who had spent decades pursuing this technology. She thought about the scientists who had repeatedly explained, with absolute confidence and careful academic reasoning, that such a thing was impossible. She thought about what happened when a species decided that impossible was not an ending. It was a beginning. Then she sent a secure transmission to Rachel Torres on Harmony. "We've had contact. 3 Tharkin vessels engaged. All neutralized or disabled. No casualties. The clock is moving. We need those names." She sent the message. Then she leaned back in her command chair and allowed herself, for just a moment, to feel the quiet satisfaction of a ship that had done exactly what it was built to do. Then she started thinking about what came next. Rachel received Cheney's message at 0900 hours. By midday, her anonymous source had responded. And this time, the source had been thorough. The incoming data package was significantly larger than the first. Not a single sensor recording. A collection. Intercepted communications. Financial records. Operational reports. And what appeared to be sections of a classified military planning document. Rachel spent 2 hours reviewing everything with Marcus. They cross-referenced the information against public council records and the intelligence reports available to her as a senior ambassador. When those 2 hours ended, she had names. She sat back in her chair and stared at the list. The feeling that settled over her was not exactly surprise. She had been a diplomat for too long to be shocked by the ability of powerful people to commit terrible acts quietly. But this was something colder. Something deeper. Something worse than she had expected. 2 consensus member species. 2 council representatives. 2 individuals who had sat across from her in that chamber, looked her in the eyes, and discussed humanity's future. 2 species whose ships had fought alongside humanity in peacekeeping operations. 2 governments humanity had trusted. The Velair. Or more specifically, a faction within the Velair government. The military branch. A group of senior commanders who had secretly supported Tharkin operations throughout the Outer Reach for at least 12 years. The motive was complicated. It involved strategic interests in regions of space bordering Tharkin territory. Resources threatened by continued human expansion. And a calculation made at a high enough level to survive internal review. That quietly restricting humanity's growth was preferable to openly confronting the diplomatic consequences of stopping it. And the Keth. The mathematically precise, relentlessly logical Keth, whose representative had sat in the council chamber and accused humanity of violating the Harmonic Accord on technical grounds. A faction within the Keth government. Smaller than the Velair operation. More radical. But better funded. They had been supplying Tharkan operatives with intelligence data. Human shipping routes. Colony supply schedules. Navigation records. The exact information needed for Tharkan vessels to intercept human ships in the most isolated and deniable regions of space. They had not been eliminating humans because they feared humanity. They had been eliminating humans because humanity's expansion was inconvenient. They had calculated that humanity could be quietly removed from the equation before it became powerful enough to make that decision costly. They had calculated wrong. This is enough to take before the council, Marcus said when they finished reviewing the documents. It's enough to show the council, Rachel replied. She looked at the data again. Whether it's enough to accomplish anything within the council is a different question. What do you mean? Rachel turned toward him. Marcus was 34. Sharp. Experienced. He had worked with her long enough to understand the basic mechanics of how the consensus functioned. But there were realities that only decades of watching the system operate from the inside could reveal. The Velair and the Keth are both founding members of the consensus. She paused. They've been members for nearly 7,000 years. They have structural influence within the council that newer members simply do not possess. She tapped the document. Any formal action against them requires a supermajority. More than 30 of 47 votes. And some of those 47 members will decide that the political cost of publicly sanctioning 2 founding members is higher than the cost of quietly resolving the issue. Meaning they let them walk. Meaning they apply private pressure. They negotiate a cease and desist agreement. They issue carefully worded statements. And nobody discusses it publicly. Marcus went quiet. And the families of the 112 colonists aboard the Helena never learn what actually happened. Rachel's voice remained controlled. That is the political path of least resistance. She looked directly at him. And I want you to understand that path exists before I tell you what I'm going to do instead. Marcus studied her expression. What are you going to do? I'm sending this data package to Admiral Cheney. A pause. And I'm sending it to the press. Marcus became completely still. Both? At the same time. If you do that, if this becomes public before the council has an opportunity to control the situation, then they can't control it. Yes. Rachel looked back at the names on her screen. The Velair faction commander. The Keth intelligence operative. The Tharkan officers who had authorized the attacks. 112 names from the Helena alone. She thought about them. Then she thought about all the others. The families of the dead deserve to know the truth. Her voice softened slightly. And the consensus needs to become what it claims to be. A pause. Or it needs to stop claiming it. She looked at Marcus. I've been a diplomat for 40 years. She spoke carefully. I believe in the process. I believe conversation usually beats violence. I believe patience usually achieves more than urgency, and that compromise is almost always preferable to confrontation. She held his gaze. But I also believe there are moments when the process has failed. Another pause. And when that happens, the only thing left is the truth. She reached toward the console. Marcus, do what must be done. This is that moment. She pressed send. Both messages transmitted simultaneously. The data package arrived in Admiral Cheney's secure inbox 6 seconds before the first major news network in the galaxy acquired the information and began broadcasting it. And the consensus. which had been built on compromise, negotiation, and the careful management of difficult truths, was suddenly confronted with a truth that could not be managed. The next 18 hours were unlike anything Rachel had experienced in 4 decades of diplomatic service. The media did not simply report the story. They detonated it. The evidence package was precise, detailed, and overwhelming. There was no realistic space left for alternative explanations. The monitoring buoy records showed the Helena being destroyed. The intercepted communications revealed Velayer and Keth involvement. The financial records documented 12 years of covert funding moving from Velayer military accounts through layers of intermediaries and into Tharkan paramilitary operations. Within 4 hours, demonstrations erupted outside consensus diplomatic facilities on 7 different worlds. Within 8 hours, 3 human colony worlds formally requested emergency status from the consensus while simultaneously informing the Council that their defense postures had been raised to maximum alert. Within 12 hours, the Velayer Grand Council released an official statement so carefully surrounded by diplomatic language that it effectively said nothing at all. And the Keth government went completely silent. For the Keth, that silence was more alarming than any public declaration could have been. Then, 18 hours after the data release, Admiral Cheney received another message. This one was not from Rachel. It was not from the anonymous source. It was transmitted across open military frequencies in clear text. A message designed for everyone to hear. It came from the Tharkan faction commander. The individual who had authorized the attacks. Commander Velkath. The transmission was brief. The vessel you call the Erebus is a violation of galactic law and a direct threat to peace throughout the outer reach. It will be destroyed. The price for threatening the Tharkan people will be paid in full. This is your only warning. Attached to the transmission was a sensor overlay. The current location of the Erebus. Accurate to within approximately 200 kilometers. They had tracking data. Someone was providing them with the ship's position. Someone inside the consensus fleet network. Cheney read the message. Then she read the attachment. Then she read both again. Finally, she opened a direct channel. Priya. Her intelligence officer appeared on the screen. Someone inside the consensus fleet network is feeding the Tharkan faction our location. A pause. I want to know how. I want to know who. Cheney's voice remained calm. And I want an answer within 3 hours. Admiral, 3 hours, Major. A pause. Yes, ma'am. From this moment forward, we treat this as a hostile intelligence penetration. Full countermeasures. Yes, ma'am. Priya hesitated. Admiral, based on Tharkan military doctrine and the assets currently believed to be operating in the region, the force they're assembling is likely 8 to 12 void cutters. She paused. Possibly more. Cheney said nothing for several seconds. 12 void cutters against the Erebus. Yes, ma'am. She thought about the 11-minute engagement that had neutralized 3. She thought about the ship operating at 98% readiness. She thought about 700 crew members aboard a vessel that was no longer bound entirely by ordinary physics. All right, she said. If they want to come, let them come. Her eyes moved to the tactical display. But I want that intelligence leak found before they arrive. A pause. Because I intend to surprise them. She looked back at Priya. And surprises only work if the enemy doesn't know exactly what we're planning. Priya Singh found the leak in 2 hours and 40 minutes. The discovery was elegant. And that made her angry. Because elegance was often the mark of someone highly skilled doing something completely wrong. The data stream had been hidden inside the Erebus' own sensor broadcasting system. It wasn't stealing information the ship wasn't already transmitting. It was using the passive sensor emissions that every vessel automatically generated as part of standard navigation safety protocols. Position. Velocity. Power signature. Normal operational data. The system simply copied those transmissions and quietly redirected them to a secondary receiver. A whisper hidden inside a shout. The relay had been installed before the Erebus ever departed the shipyard. Someone had placed it there during the final preparation period. Give me a list of every person who accessed the sensor broadcasting system during the 48 hours before departure, Priya ordered her team. She looked at the security feed. I don't care about rank. I don't care about clearance level. Anyone who physically accessed the system or connected through the network. The list contained 11 names. 8 were crew members who had worked directly on the sensor system during standard departure preparations. Their movements were easily verified through security logs and signed work orders. 2 more were engineering supervisors who had performed final oversight reviews. The 11th name was different. A civilian contractor. A software integration specialist employed by a company with a long-standing fleet support contract. His name was Tarun Vo. He had been aboard for 30 hours during the final departure rush. His current status read, departed vessel. Cleared security. Destination unknown. Priya opened his file. Tarun Vo had an immaculate record. Excellent references. Years of successful work on sensitive fleet projects. Every security screening completed. Every background check passed. He had access to the sensor broadcasting system because he had legitimate credentials. Someone had approved the work order. And during the chaos of an accelerated departure, nobody had looked closely enough. She pulled his financial records. The request required a priority override authorization. She received it from Chini in less than 30 seconds. The records showed exactly what she expected. A large payment. Moved through 4 separate intermediaries. Originating from an account flagged by intelligence systems as connected to a Velair military procurement office. They had been inside the ship before it ever left the dock. Ma'am, Priya reported. We have confirmed intelligence penetration. Chini looked up. The relay has been disabled. Our position is no longer transmitting. A pause. But they had approximately. Priya checked the timeline. 22 hours of position data before we shut it down. She continued. Enough for them to locate us. Yes, Chini replied. And enough for them to know our course and velocity. Which means they can generate a predicted projection of our current position. Correct. Chini considered the display. How accurate is their projection likely to be? If they have competent tacticians, very accurate. Within 500 kilometers after 12 hours. Priya looked at the calculations. After 24 hours, perhaps 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers of deviation depending on course adjustments. And how long until their fleet arrives? Estimated speed? Yes. 14 hours. 14 hours. Priya watched the admiral calculate. Enemy projection accuracy. Time until arrival. Available options. She saw the exact moment Chini reached a decision. We're going to move. Priya waited. But not randomly. Chini brought up the tactical projection. I want us to move into a position that matches the location they would calculate from the stolen data. She paused. I want them to believe we're exactly where they expect us to be. Another pause. And then I want the Erebus to go full quantum dark. Priya was quiet. Full quantum dark had never been tested in a live tactical engagement. It meant pushing the quantum anchor to maximum output. Reducing the ship's probability presence in normal space as far as the systems allowed. Theoretical models suggested physical presence could be reduced to approximately 12%. Meaning the ship would only exist in detectable normal space roughly 1 time out of 8. In that condition, locating it would be almost impossible. The weapon systems would actually become more effective. A ship with minimal physical interference could project quantum torpedoes with greater precision. But the trade-off was significant. Its own sensors would be severely degraded. If we go full quantum dark, Priya said carefully, our sensor awareness of the incoming fleet will be limited. She chose her next words carefully. We'll be operating partially blind. Not blind, Chini corrected. We'll have passive quantum sensors. She looked toward the tactical station. Their ships will still disturb the quantum field around them. Those interactions will register even if conventional electromagnetic sensors are compromised. Then she turned toward James Cole. He had been listening quietly. James. He looked up. In full quantum dark, what is our effective sensor range? Passive quantum sensors give us approximately 60% of normal sensor range, James said. Better than nothing. He glanced toward the tactical display. And our targeting systems aren't dependent on conventional electromagnetic tracking. They're based on quantum field interactions. A faint pause. Actually, our accuracy improves while operating at full dark. The quantum torpedoes have less local interference to navigate. Better accuracy and a harder target, Chini said. She considered the trade-off. At the cost of reduced sensor range and limited precision maneuvering. James nodded. Yes, ma'am. Chini looked around the bridge. Then we set the ambush. She turned back toward the tactical display. We move into the position they expect us to occupy. We let them come looking for a ship they believe they understand. A pause. And when they arrive, they find a vessel that is only 12% physically real and firing weapons at them from a state of superposition. Priya considered the image. 12 Tharkin void cutters arriving at a location they believed was confirmed. Expecting a target they had intelligence on. Expecting a ship they could track. Instead, finding something barely present in normal space and launching weapons they could not detect until those weapons were already inside their shields. That, she said quietly, is going to be a very bad day for the Tharkin faction. That, Chini replied, is the idea. The Erebus moved. It did so with the quiet precision of a ship that understood exactly what it was. No dramatic acceleration. No sudden engine flare. No obvious maneuver. Just a controlled, deliberate adjustment that placed it precisely where a skilled Tharkin tactician, working from 22 hours of stolen position data, would calculate the ship should be 14 hours later. Then it stopped. And it went dark. The quantum anchor pushed to maximum output. The power readings on the bridge, always slightly unusual, always carrying a strange blur that human perception struggled to fully process, became something even stranger. The instruments showed the ship's physical presence decreasing. 90%. 75. 50. 30. 20. 12. The universe outside the viewports looked unchanged. Stars remained stars. Space remained space. But something about it felt different. Less certain. As if reality itself had softened around the edges. Crew members who reached out and touched the ship's interior walls described a faint resistance beneath their hands. Not the solid certainty of normal matter. Something between contact and possibility. Quantum anchor at maximum, Yara confirmed. Physical presence at 11.8%. She checked another display. Conventional sensor output reduced to 62% of normal. She looked up. We're as dark as we can get. Good, Chini said. She settled into her command chair. Now we wait. The waiting was harder than the fighting. It always had been, in Chini's experience. Combat brought urgency. Decision-making. The constant demand of the moment. The mind had no room to wander. Waiting was different. Waiting meant carrying the full weight of what was coming with nothing to do except endure it. She spent part of that time walking the ship again. The crew knew the situation. She had never believed in hiding tactical realities from the people responsible for surviving them. Informed people made better decisions. And being treated like adults mattered more to morale than temporary comfort built on false reassurance. They knew 12 ships were coming. They knew the Erebus was the most advanced warship humanity had ever created. They knew both facts at the same time. And they handled that knowledge the way humans always handled difficult moments. With dark humor. With focused work. With small acts of kindness toward each other. She found 2 crew members in the mess playing cards. Their game was being quietly transmitted through the section intercom system so people working at distant stations could hear the familiar rhythm of conversation and laughter. She found engineers running diagnostics that were already showing green because sometimes hands needed a task even when the task was unnecessary. She found a medical officer in sick bay. Not because anyone was injured. Because she had arranged the room carefully and methodically, making sure everything was ready. In engineering, she found Sophia Marsh sitting on the floor with her back against the quantum drive housing. Sophia looked up when Chini entered. "Do you know what I think about when I think about this ship?" Chini sat down beside her. "Tell me." "My grandmother was a physicist." Sophia looked toward the massive machinery beside them. She spent her entire career studying quantum coherence. 30 years of people telling her that macroscopic quantum stability was impossible. She was quiet for a moment. She died 12 years ago. She never saw this. Chini listened. "I entered this field because of her. I wanted to finish what she started." Sophia smiled faintly. "When we finally stabilized the quantum anchor, when the coherence held at macroscopic scale for the first time." She shook her head slightly. "I sat in the lab and cried for almost an hour." A pause. "I kept thinking, she would have loved this." Her voice softened. "She would have thought it was the most beautiful thing in the universe." Chini remained silent. "I just want to know it matters," Sophia said. "All of it." She looked around engineering. Her work. My work. Everyone's work. It already matters. Chini's voice was quiet. The 312 people whose lives were taken from them in those attacks. The people who are alive right now because the Erebus changed the calculation. She looked at Sophia. It matters to them. A pause. And before this is over, it is going to matter to a lot more people. Sophia nodded slowly. Don't let them destroy it. Chini stood. I have no intention of that. Then she returned to the bridge. 12 hours later, the Tharkin fleet arrived. They emerged from dark space in a spread formation. Not the envelopment pattern used by the previous 3 vessels. Something more advanced. More deliberate. A layered approach. For ships positioned in the outer ring. For maintaining middle distance. For held back as reserve. It was a formation built for sustained engagement rather than a single decisive strike. A strategy designed to apply constant pressure from multiple directions while reserve units rotated forward whenever attacking ships needed to withdraw. It was a formation built around one assumption. That the enemy would behave like a normal ship. Chini watched the fleet appear on the quantum sensor display. The image was blurry at the edges. Less precise than conventional tracking. But unmistakably there. She counted. 12. Exactly as projected. Void cutters. Exactly as expected. And moving in precisely the formation Priya had predicted. There, James said quietly. At the projected position. He looked at the display. They think they know where we are. Give them a moment, Chini said. She watched the Tharkin fleet begin its initial maneuvering. The careful, methodical movement of a force that believed it was tracking a known target at a known location. She watched weapon systems come online. She watched scanning arrays sweep through the empty space ahead of them, searching for a ship that was only 11.8% physically real. They wouldn't find it. Not with conventional scans. Not at that range. The Erebus was effectively invisible. On the Tharkin command vessel, the largest ship positioned in the inner reserve ring, she imagined a commander staring at his sensor displays. Finding nothing. Checking the calculations. Beginning to question whether their intelligence was correct. Their scanning, Priya confirmed. Electromagnetic and gravitational. A pause. No quantum scanning capability. She looked toward Chini. They can't see us. Good. Chini kept her eyes on the display. James. Yes, ma'am. 12 ships. Priority targets. She highlighted the command vessel. Their command ship in the reserve ring. Remove command and control, and the fleet's coordination degrades significantly. She moved to the outer formation. Then the 4 outer ring ships. They're the first layer of their attack structure. She watched the formation continue closing. If we remove them, the formation collapses inward and their tactical options become much more limited. James nodded. Command ship first. Then outer ring. 2 quantum torpedoes per target. She paused. Maximum collapse bias. Her eyes shifted to Yara. On my mark, transition from full dark to combat operational. She watched the readings. Raise physical presence to 40%. A pause. Enough to fire effectively. Another pause. Not enough to become an easy target. Ready, Yara said. Mark. The Erebus shifted. Every Tharkin sensor array registered it at the same moment. One instant, nothing existed. The next, a massive quantum signature appeared. 11.8% physically real. Then 38%. A ship occupying the space where there had been nothing only moments before. The Erebus fired. 2 quantum torpedoes toward the command vessel. They traveled in superposition. Neither fully present nor fully absent. Until the exact moment of impact. Then they collapsed. Inside the command bridge. 2 more torpedoes launched toward the nearest outer ring vessel. The entire firing sequence lasted 4 seconds. Before the Tharkin fleet could fully react. Before their targeting systems could establish a lock, Chini spoke. Back to full dark. The Erebus disappeared again. Physical presence dropped back to 12%. The Tharkin fleet, which had begun targeting a threat that appeared without warning, now faced the impossible task of finding that same threat a second time. They were trying to fight something that was almost not there. The command ship vanished first. Silent. Power signatures gone. The first outer ring vessel took a direct hit and lost propulsion. The remaining 11 ships opened fire. But they were firing at a ghost. A sensor return that flickered between existence and absence. A target their systems could not lock because the target itself was not fully committed to being there. The first volley contained 37 rounds. 22 passed through harmlessly. The Erebus simply did not exist enough for them to interact with. 8 struck the quantum field and lost most of their energy before reaching the ship. 7 impacted the conventional shields and were absorbed. Damage report, Chini said. Shield strain across 4 sections, Yara replied. 1 section showing minor structural stress. She checked again. 0 casualties. Remarkable, David said quietly. Chini didn't look away from the tactical display. We're not finished. She turned toward James. Outer Ring 3 and 4. The Erebus flickered into combat presence. 4 torpedoes launched in 3 seconds. Then the ship vanished again. 2 more outer ring vessels went silent. The Tharkin formation began to break apart. What happened next was, Cheney would think afterward, not a battle in the traditional sense. It was something closer to a demonstration. A systematic demonstration of what the Erebus represented. The Erebus had 11 ships remaining against it. And those 11 ships were not inferior. They were experienced vessels. Well crewed. Well armed. Tactically advanced. They adapted quickly to the strange pattern of the Erebus' quantum presence appearing and disappearing. They began firing along predicted trajectories rather than attempting direct targeting. They attempted coordinated saturation volleys, filling enough of space with weapons fire that something had to connect regardless of where the Erebus existed at any given moment. They did everything a capable enemy should do. They were simply fighting a ship that no longer obeyed the same rules. Every time the Erebus transitioned into combat presence, it remained there for no more than 4 to 8 seconds before returning to full dark. During those brief windows, it absorbed incoming fire. Some weapons reached it. Some did not. And then it answered with weapons that could not be defended against. Every cycle. Another Tharkin vessel went silent. Another lost critical systems. Another piece of the fleet disappeared from the fight. 9 minutes into the engagement. 5 ships neutralized. 6 remaining. 17 minutes. 8 ships neutralized. 4 remaining. At 22 minutes, with 3 ships still operational and the 4th losing propulsion systems, something happened that Cheney had not expected. The remaining 3 vessels stopped. Their weapons powered down. Their offensive systems went offline. Then, on the open communication channel. Not the tactical frequency, not a military command line, but the open channel intended for everyone to hear, a voice spoke. This is Commander Valrath, commanding the Tharkin vessel Perseverance. A pause. We are requesting cessation of hostilities. Another pause. We are lowering weapons. Cheney looked at the display. 3 vessels. Reduced power output. Weapons offline. They're surrendering, James said. Cheney watched them silently. She thought about the Helena. 112 colonists. Families. Children. Lives erased and hidden behind falsified reports. She thought about the other confirmed incidents. The others still being uncovered. She thought about the broadcast message. Asterisk the price will be paid in full. Asterisk she thought about the certainty behind those words. But she also thought about something else. What it meant to be the most powerful ship in the known galaxy. And what a person, or a species, chose to do with that power. She thought about humanity. About what every species watching them was waiting to learn. Whether humans were the kind of people who destroyed because they could. Or the kind who chose restraint because they had to. Open a channel, she said. Channel open. This is Admiral Cheney of the United Earth vessel Erebus. She looked directly at the display. Your surrender is accepted. A pause. You will maintain weapons offline and hold your current position. She continued. A human diplomatic team will be sent to your vessels. Your crews will be treated according to consensus prisoner protocols. Her voice remained steady. No harm will come to your personnel. Another pause. And you will tell us everything you know about your faction's operations against human shipping in the outer reach. She let the silence sit. Everything. Names. Dates. Locations. All of it. She looked once more at the 3 ships. From this moment forward, the accounting begins. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then, understood, Admiral. A quieter voice. We will cooperate. The final engagement report was completed several hours later. Duration, 26 minutes. Enemy vessels involved, 12. Neutralized, 9. Surrendered, 3. Enemy casualties, 34 confirmed. Enemy injuries, 91 confirmed. Damage to the Erebus, moderate shield strain. 2 sections requiring repair. 1 structural stress point requiring inspection. Casualties aboard the Erebus, 0. 0. Cheney sat in her command chair long after the battle ended and stared at that number. 0. Not because they had been fortunate. Not because the enemy had been weak. Because the crew had built something that should not have existed. And then they had possessed the discipline and skill to use it exactly as it needed to be used. She thought she should feel victorious. Instead, she felt tired. Grateful. And painfully aware that this was not the conclusion. It was the beginning. The battle had been simple. There had been an enemy. There had been a threat. There had been an outcome. What came next would be harder. Slower. The work of justice. The work of proving the truth. The work of forcing accountability in a galaxy far more complicated than any tactical display could represent. She thought about Sophia Marsh's grandmother. 30 years of being told something was impossible. Communications, Cheney said. She looked toward the bridge crew. Get me Ambassador Torres. Rachel Torres was inside the council chamber when the news arrived. She was there for the 3rd emergency session in 2 days. The council had reached something close to institutional panic, which, for this body, expressed itself through an extraordinary amount of formal procedure. Because when everything became uncertain, process was the anchor that kept 47 species from simply shouting over one another. 3 separate working groups had been created to review the evidence package she had released. A formal inquiry had begun into the Velshire faction. The Keth government had finally broken its silence, releasing a statement that contained a great many carefully chosen words that ultimately said very little. But buried deep in the 4th paragraph was one word. Regrettable. The Keth cultural specialists on Rachel's team had explained that it was the closest their language had to an admission of responsibility. The news from the Erebus engagement reached the council in the middle of the session. 12 Tharkan warships. 1 human warship. Engagement duration, 26 minutes. Human casualties, 0. Rachel watched the information spread across 47 alien faces, each species expressing shock in its own way. And she thought about what this moment would mean for the next century. The Velshire Grand Counselor, the replacement representative who had taken the seat after the previous counselor resigned within 8 hours of Rachel's data release, spoke quietly. The weapons passed through their shields. Yes, Rachel said. That is how the quantum torpedo system functions. She paused. And there is currently no known defense. The silence that followed was immense. Not currently, she added. Ambassador Torres, the Grath representative said. The same one who had questioned humanity's intentions during the earlier session. 300 years ago, when your species first reached the stars, the consensus among the older members of this body was that humanity was interesting, but ultimately not exceptional. The deep subsonic rumble of the translator carried the weight of his words. We believed you would follow the same path all species follow. A pause. That you would be manageable. Yes, Rachel said. I have read those historical assessments. They were wrong. The Grath representative was quiet. Yes. His translator struggled slightly with the complexity of the next phrase. We have been systematically wrong about humanity for 3 centuries. The sound from his species carried a meaning somewhere between regret and reckoning. And we have allowed, through negligence, through political convenience, through the particular moral failure of looking away from truths we did not want to confront. He stopped. Your people to be killed. Not by our hands. A pause. But through our inaction. Rachel kept her expression neutral. But something inside her loosened. Something that had been tight for 15 years. Yes, she said. The Grath representative leaned forward. What does your species want? He paused. Not what you want from the Erebus. His eyes moved around the chamber. What do you want from us? What do you want from this institution? Rachel had been preparing for this question since the moment she pressed send on the evidence package. She had written a statement. Carefully balanced. Carefully diplomatic. Every phrase measured. She set that answer aside. Accountability. The word was simple. Direct. Not performance. Not procedure. Real accountability. She looked around the chamber. Names attached to decisions. Consequences attached to those decisions. And a record that exists and can be referenced the next time someone decides that the inconvenience of humanity's growth is worth the lives of our colonists. The chamber remained silent. We are not asking for war reparations. We are not asking for punishment against entire species. She paused. We are asking for what every civilization in this room claims to believe in. Her voice hardened slightly. Justice. Applied consistently. Applied to the powerful the same way it is applied to the weak. She let the word settle. And we want the investigations completed properly within 1 year. All of them. With findings made public. A voice interrupted. And if we do not? It came from Zoe. The Keth representative. But something about their voice was different. The usual mathematical precision was gone. They sounded tired. And somehow, that made them sound more honest than Rachel had ever heard them before. Then we pursue justice through other means, Rachel said. She looked directly at them. We are very patient. A pause. And as you have now observed, we are very capable. She allowed the statement to remain there. No threat. No embellishment. Just a fact. While Rachel addressed the council, Cheney was speaking with Valrath. The Tharkin commander had been transferred to the Erebus under prisoner protocols. He had been treated correctly. Provided food. Allowed rest. Given medical attention. Now he sat across from Cheney in the briefing room. He was tall and angular, with gray skin and deep amber eyes. There was a stillness to him. The stillness of someone who had finally stopped fighting. You knew what you were sending those ships against, Cheney said. Valrath looked at her. We knew the reported capabilities. His translator gave his voice an accent that reminded Cheney strangely of someone she had known during graduate school. Our analysts determined the reports were exaggerated. Human technologists tend to. He stopped. Tend to what? Cheney asked. Overstate their capabilities, Valrath finished. Yes. A pause. Were you wrong about human technology generally? Cheney watched him. Or only this one? Valrath lowered his eyes. It appears we have been wrong about human technologists generally for some time. Cheney studied him. He was not what she expected. Not the fanatic the faction's rhetoric suggested. Not the emotionless strategist described in intelligence briefings. He looked like what he actually was. A military officer who had followed orders for a long time without asking enough of the questions he should have asked. The Helena, Cheney said. 112 people. Families. Children. Your faction ordered that. Valrath remained silent for a long moment. I did not personally issue that order. Did you know about the operation? Another pause. Yes. How many? How many operations were you personally aware of? Valrath looked down. Then he began to tell her. And Cheney listened. Each operation. The name of the vessel. The date. The number of people lost. The tactical justification his faction had used. Cheney listened without interrupting because this accounting needed to be complete. It needed to exist in his own words. Not filtered through her questions. Not shaped by her assumptions. When he finished, there was silence. Why? Chini asked at last. Not the strategic explanation. Not the political calculation. The real reason. She looked at him. Why did your people decide the answer was killing colonists? Valrath stared back with those amber eyes. Because they were far away, he said finally. And because they were not powerful enough to make the cost of killing them unacceptable. He paused. And because we believed they would remain that way. The silence stretched. We were wrong. Yes, Chini said. You were. She stood. You will provide a complete accounting to the consensus inquiry team when they arrive. She looked directly at him. Every operation. Every name. Every order. And everyone who gave them. A pause. If you do that completely and honestly, I will argue to the inquiry that a distinction must be made between those who planned and authorized these operations and those who carried them out. She held his gaze. I make no promises about the outcome. I make no promises about what the council will decide. But I will make that argument. Valrath looked at her for a long moment. His expression was difficult to interpret. Then he spoke. Your species confuses me, Admiral. Chini waited. You create a vessel capable of destroying any fleet sent against you. A pause. And then you offer your enemy commander a path other than destruction. We built this ship so we would never have to use it that way, Chini said. The purpose was never to destroy everything. She looked toward the viewport. The purpose was to make it clear that we could. A pause. And to make sure better choices remained available. In the aftermath, the galaxy changed. Not instantly. It never did. There was no single dramatic moment where everything suddenly became different. Things changed the way real things changed.
Slowly. Then quickly. Then slowly again. A process that took years to fully understand. But one that created a clear dividing line. A before. And an after. The consensus inquiry began. Not the kind that disappeared into committees and forgotten archives. A real inquiry. One with full council oversight. Independent investigators from 12-member species. A mandate requiring public reporting. The Velshire faction leaders were named. The Keth intelligence operatives were named. The Tharkan commanders were named. For the first time in consensus history, founding member species faced formal accountability proceedings. And the proceedings continued because the political calculation had changed. Because protecting the powerful at the expense of the truth now carried a cost. 47 species were watching. 47 species would remember. The families of the Helena colonists were told what had happened. Then the families of every lost vessel. The information was delivered carefully. With support. With acknowledgement. With the understanding that no explanation and no punishment could restore what had been taken. Some families responded with anger. Some were devastated in a way deeper than anger. Some, in the strange and complicated human way, were grateful. Grateful to finally know. Grateful to no longer exist in the endless uncertainty of unanswered questions. Not because the truth was enough. But because it was true. Rachel Torres was invited to address the council once more. 3 months after the Erebus engagement. This time, she gave a speech unlike any she had delivered before. It was personal. She spoke about her grandfather. About how he had been aboard one of the earliest human colony ships. About the stories he told her of looking at an alien sky for the first time and feeling the overwhelming size of the universe. She spoke about what humanity had wanted when it reached the stars. Not conquest. Not dominance. Connection. She spoke about how difficult trust was to build, how quickly it could be broken, and how much patience it required to rebuild. She ended with a sentence that traveled far beyond the council chamber. The galaxy is not ours alone, and we have never believed it was. What we have always believed is that the cost of claiming a place within it should be the same for everyone. From this moment forward, we ask only to be held to the same standard we hold ourselves to. No more. No less. The speech was broadcast across 63 inhabited systems, translated into 49 languages. Later, diplomatic historians would identify it as the moment humanity's relationship with the consensus formally changed. Not only politically, but conceptually. The galaxy began reconsidering what humans were, what they could become, and what they actually wanted. Sheeny took the Erebus back to the outer reach. Not to fight. To show the flag. An old naval phrase. To be present. Visible. Undeniably present. In the region where human colonists lived, worked, and built new worlds. To make the unspoken message clear. We are here. And we will remain here. And if you consider doing what others did before, make the calculation first. She stopped at every human colony within range. She allowed colonists to come aboard in carefully organized groups and see the ship that had changed the equation. She sat in mess halls, in recreation areas, in observation rooms. She answered questions until she was hoarse. She watched Danny Reeves show a group of 12-year-old colonists from New Providence the relay coupling he and the Admiral had repaired together in a maintenance crawlway at 0200 hours. She watched those children look at a 22-year-old ensign who had helped solve a quantum coherence problem, who had helped defend a ship against a fleet of 12. And she wondered what they would carry with them from that moment. The idea that something impossible could become possible. That you could sit in a maintenance crawlway at 2 in the morning with a problem you couldn't solve. On a ship that should not exist. And still find the answer. That the walls everyone said could never be crossed were sometimes only walls. And walls had doors. Dr. Sophia Marsh submitted her paper. The title was, Macroscopic Quantum Coherence Maintenance via Anchored Probability Fields, an Experimental Report. It explained, in full technical detail, exactly how the quantum anchor functioned. She did not name it after herself. Even though she had every right to. She named it after her grandmother, the Dr. Eleanor Marsh Coherence Sustained Field. The paper entered the scientific community like a stone dropped into a perfectly still pond. The ripples moved outward in every direction at once. Within 6 months, 13 different research institutions across the consensus were attempting to replicate the result. 3 Velera research teams, 2 Keth for Human, 1 Dothiki, 1 Graph, and 2 joint human-alien collaborations. Some were focused on peaceful applications. Quantum coherence at a macroscopic scale carried implications for computing, medicine, energy generation, and material science. Others were exploring military applications, which was inevitable and which Sophia, Sheeny, and Rachel all understood could not be prevented, only influenced. The consensus, with difficulty and through genuine political effort from Rachel's team, established a joint technology governance framework. Not the old harmonic accord, which had clearly failed its purpose. A new framework, with stronger enforcement mechanisms, transparency requirements, and a clause that had been quietly debated for 3 weeks before finally passing. Any technology developed with military applications had to undergo review by a joint human consensus council before deployment. Humanity accepted this, though not without argument. There was intense domestic debate, fierce in some circles, over whether accepting consensus oversight was worth the compromise. Sheeny testified at 2 legislative hearings. Rachel testified at 4. The argument they each made, separately and in their own ways, was ultimately the same. The purpose of building the Erebus had never been to stand apart. The purpose had been to earn the right to stand as equals, and equals participated in governance. It passed. Belrath was put on trial. So were his commanders, the Velshire faction leaders, and the Keth intelligence operatives. The trials were long, difficult, and produced outcomes that fully satisfied no one, which Rachel said was often the clearest sign that the process had been fair. The Velshire faction leaders received formal censure and were removed from their military positions. The Keth operatives were convicted of intelligence crimes. The Tharkin commanders received the harshest sentences, including formal recognition of crimes against sentient beings under consensus law. Wrath, who had cooperated completely, received a reduced sentence. He was assigned to a joint reparations program, 10 years of work under consensus supervision, helping rebuild human colony infrastructure in the Outer Reach. He approached the assignment with what Rachel described, after meeting him twice, as grim but genuine commitment. She found something in that which, in the complicated human way, felt quietly hopeful. 6 months after the Erebus engagement, Admiral Cheney stood alone on the observation deck of the ship and looked at the stars. She did this sometimes when the work slowed and the crew moved through their routines without needing her, when the galaxy seemed, for a brief moment, to be holding its breath between one crisis and the next. She stood in the darkness with the stars spread before her and thought about what it meant to be here, on this ship, in this moment, in this life. She was 53 years old. She had spent her entire adult life in uniform. She had witnessed war, peace, and the unremarkable, exhausting space between them. She had watched humanity enter the galaxy as newcomers, uncertain and ambitious. And she had watched them spend 3 centuries proving themselves by the only standard available to them, the standard they created for themselves because no one else was willing to create it for them. She thought about the things she had feared along the way. She had been afraid when the Erebus was first explained to her that she was being handed a weapon too powerful for anyone to use responsibly. She had been afraid that the power of the ship would eventually shape the purpose behind it, that the ability to win would slowly become the instinct to destroy. She had watched other species and other human commanders fall into that pattern. The logic was seductive. If you could destroy anything, why not destroy whatever threatened you? Why not create perfect, permanent safety by removing every possible danger before it could reach you? But she had held on to a different idea. She had carried it through the engagement with 3 ships, through the engagement with 12 ships, and through every political battle that followed. The idea was simple. Almost painfully simple. The kind of idea that ended up written on plaques and repeated at graduation ceremonies until familiarity sometimes erased the true weight behind it. Power was never the point. What you chose to do with it was the point. They're going to contribute things we never even considered. There are going to be papers coming out of this that I'll be reading and thinking, how did I not see that? Good, Cheney said. That's how it should work. We changed things, Sophia said quietly, not as a declaration of pride, just as a simple acknowledgement. Yes, Cheney said. We did. The question is what we changed them into. Sophia looked out at the stars. Do you think it lasts? The inquiry. The new framework. All of it. Chinwei was silent for a moment. I think it lasts as long as we choose to make it last, she said. I think nothing good in the universe survives on its own momentum. Someone has to keep pushing. Someone has to keep paying attention. She paused. But I also think the fact that 47 species had to sit in that chamber and hear a complete accounting of what happened, then vote on consequences in front of the entire galaxy, that creates a reference point. Something they can be held against. Something that makes it harder the next time for people who want to look away. Reference points, Sophia said. Is that what history is? Just reference points? It's what useful history is, Cheney said. History that repeats itself without anyone learning from it isn't useful. History that gives you something you can point to and say, this happened. This is what it cost. This is what we chose. That's the kind that actually changes things. She looked out at the stars and thought about it. We're creating a reference point right now. This moment. This ship. These decisions. The galaxy will remember. 3 weeks later, something happened that no one had predicted. A message arrived. It was not from the consensus. Not from the Tharkin faction. Not from any of the parties currently involved in the diplomatic and legal proceedings. It came from the outer reach. From a location in space that no registry identified as containing any population, settlement, or installation. A new signal. A new species. They had apparently been listening for some time. They had been watching what humanity did with the Erebus. They had been watching, according to a communication that took 3 weeks to partially decode and still remained only about 40% understood, not with fear and not with hostility, but with something the translation team, after extensive debate, rendered as cautious recognition. They called themselves, as closely as the linguists could determine, something that sounded in their own language less like a name and more like a chord. The translation team called them the Resonance. They were not a threat. They were not yet an ally. They were something the galaxy had not encountered in 200 years, a new voice. And they had chosen to speak to humanity first. Rachel Torres sat in her office on Harmony and read the partial translation of the resonant message 3 times. Then she called Sheeny. "Did you see it?" she asked. "I saw it," Sheeny said. "They chose us first." "Yes," Rachel said. "Because of what we did with the Erebus." "Not just because of what we did," Sheeny said. "Because of what we didn't do. Because we won and chose not to destroy everything we had defeated. Because we had the ability to do worse, and we chose to do better." She looked down at the translated message. "I think, if I understand what 40% of a first contact message can actually communicate, that's exactly what they're saying. They've been watching to find out what kind of species we were. And based on what they saw, they decided we were the kind of species worth speaking to." Rachel sat with that for a moment. Then she laughed. A real laugh. A full, unexpected laugh that escaped before she could stop it. The kind that comes when something is both impossible to predict and somehow exactly right. "We built a ship that broke physics," she said. "And what it proved was that we could be trusted." "That was the point," Sheeny said. "Was it?" "It was always the point." Sheeny looked toward the stars. "The ship was only how we proved it.